want to bring in Sina Zodi, is a assistant professor of Middle East politics at the George Washington University, joining us live from Washington, D.C. as well. Good evening, Professor. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us here on TRT World on this very dramatic night. Now, of course, Donald Trump is not the first U.S. president to deal with sort of the Iran issue, but Donald Trump is the first president to send B-2 bombers and send in those heavy bombs, bunker-busting bombs, and bomb 3 nuclear sites in Iran. What do you think it was that led Donald Trump to eventually make that decision that it was the best course of action to actually send U.S. weapons bombing Iran?
Well, I would say that ever since President Gerald Ford, the U.S. presidents had to deal with the Iranian nuclear issue. But I think to answer your question, we have to keep in mind that President Trump said that he's the president of peace. He repeatedly complained that former American presidents had started wars. He even accused President Obama of wanting to start a war with Iran over its nuclear program, and yet he was the one who did it. What made him decide to attack? I think his instinct, his heart was to stay out of the fight. I think he was pulled into it by neocon Republicans, including Tom Cotton, Lindsey Graham. And I also think that Prime Minister of Israel played a big role in dragging the president into war. We have to keep in mind that the former defense minister of Israel was a few days ago pointed out that the U.S. has an obligation to get into a fight and attack Iran. We also had the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, who pointed out a few days ago that Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to fight Iran to the last American. So I think we could safely make the argument that instead of Trump being in charge of the events led him to a war that he said he would not want to start.
Now, because you're a professor of Middle East politics, and we've had numerous guests on tonight that have all said that, this is possibly a mistake on Trump's part, the fact that he wants this to just sort of be a one-off strike, and then that Iran is going to come to the table and basically give up and end the war. And the guests have all been telling us that, Iran is probably going to retaliate, and this is just going to lead to an escalation. From your point of view, what kind of chain reaction do you think that Donald Trump has set in motion with these strikes on Iran?
Well, I am quite certain that the Iranians will have a response. It could be from a diplomatic front. Iranians could be the next country after North Korea who would withdraw from the NPT. There were already discussions in Iran that the NPT is not benefiting the country, and withdrawing it would simply make Iran free of any legal obligation. So that's one option that Iran could have. Another option is that Iran has a technical capacity to test a crude device, which is not a sophisticated implosion device, but still it is a crude nuclear device, and it could get Iran into the nuclear club. It would make sense because for decades, Iranians tried to stay out of a fight with the United States. They did everything they could to avoid a war with the United States. Now that their policies and objectives, strategy have failed, this might be the only option. And thirdly, on a very short-term notice, they could decide to attack American bases in the region. But they might also have to keep in mind that the U.S. has a lot of assets in the region. President Trump has deployed a lot of assets to the region. And Iranians have to keep in mind that this could escalate the tensions even further. I don't think that President Trump has any intention of a full-scale war with Iran, but Iranians are at a point that they have no option but to respond one way or another.
I wonder if there's a sort of a double standard here at play when it comes to whether or not you actually have nuclear weapons. You know, Iran, they're saying that they have their nuclear program. It's only for civilian purposes. It's only for peaceful purposes. But then on the other hand, you have Israel that hasn't signed up to the NPT and employing this sort of strategic ambiguity of whether or not they actually have nuclear weapons. You know, everyone believes that Israel has nuclear weapons. But the world is not reacting the same way when it comes to Israel as now we've seen when it comes to Iran. Is there a double standard here?
Well, first I have to tell you that Iran has been under attack by 2 nuclear weapon states at this point. Last week, Israel, which has 90 nuclear warheads, attacked Iran. It violated the additional protocol of Geneva Convention by attacking nuclear facilities under safeguards. We also have the United States that just attacked Iran, a non-nuclear weapon state. So, but to answer your question, absolutely, there is a double standard. NPT is inherently and discriminatory in nature. What it means is that it tells some countries that you have no right to have nuclear weapons, whereas some other countries have a right to possess nuclear weapons. When it comes to the Israeli nuclear arsenal, the U.S. position is that we're not going to ask the Israelis anything about their nuclear arsenal. And this goes back to President Nixon and the agreement that he made with the former Prime Minister of Israel, where there was the understanding was that the U.S. would never ask the Israelis about their nuclear weapons arsenal, and the Israelis would never declare it. So that this is why we're not seeing rather any U.S. president asking the Israelis or pressing the Israelis to join the NPT or renounce their nuclear weapons.
Now, here in Istanbul, this is a diplomatic weekend as well, where you have the OIC, diplomats from the OIC meeting. President Erdogan was meeting with Iran's foreign minister right here in Istanbul on Saturday, and this meeting is expected to continue on Sunday. Some of the words that we're hearing from this meeting was that Turkey was sort of offering to play a mediator role between Iran and the U.S. We also heard from Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, saying that if, in fact, the U.S. starts attacking Iran, this would be very, very dangerous for everyone in the region. Do you think that now the sort of diplomatic solution, as proposed by the Europeans, as proposed by Turkey, as proposed by a number of entities, is that completely off the table? Are we going to now see sort of an all-out war in the region?
I certainly hope not, but I think the Europeans are at this point irrelevant. They have proven not to be able to do anything in terms of de-escalating tensions or keeping the peace. I think Iran's regional friends, including Turkey, Oman, Qatar, they could play, or even the Saudis at this point, they could play a significant role in de-escalating tensions to ensure that we don't have an all-out war in the region. But again, I don't think that the Europeans can do anything, or I don't even think that they're relevant anymore at this point. Because, again, as I pointed out a few minutes ago, for 2 decades at least, Iran has tried to avoid a scenario like what happened tonight, but it happened. Which means that the Iranian foreign policy, their outward strategy has failed. They could think that it's not going to get worse than this. We are already at war with the U.S., and they might decide to act.
But do you think it was a mistake? Do you think that this will actually lead the U.S. down another path of, years of conflict, like in In Iraq, for example, Iraq has been an example that we've been talking about a number of times over these last couple of days about the warnings from the US and from Britain about WMDs in Iraq, and then eventually they invaded Iraq. They never found any WMDs. And now we have a similar situation where there are warnings about Iran trying to find or trying to produce nuclear weapons. Now the US has launched these strikes, the 3 strikes on 3 nuclear sites in Iran. Is that what you're seeing? Years and years of conflict now between the US, Israel, and Iran?
Well, I think that U.S. is on the brink of getting itself into another war that it tried to avoid. Again, I do want to emphasize that President Trump claimed that he's the president of peace. His base of support does not back a conflict with Iran. But we also have to keep in mind that Iran is not Iraq. Iran is a much larger country. It has a much larger population, and unlike Iraq, is not that easy to invade. Iranians are very nationalistic. There's a national cohesion, unlike Iraq. So if, God forbid, we are at the point of invading Iran, it will not be a piece of cake like Iraq was. And I think that the U.S. will transition from a limping giant in the region to a disabled superpower in the Middle East.
Why is it different? Why would you say that invading Iran would be a different story than what it was invading Iraq?
Well, as I pointed out, Iran is much larger compared to Iraq. It has a much larger population. Its national cohesion is different from Iraq. We have to keep in mind that Iraq was made, rather, with all due respect to my Iraqi friends, it was made by Great Britain from 3 Ottoman provinces. Iran, unlike Iraq, is a nation state which has been sitting there for 3,000 years. It has endured repeated invasions, but yet it maintained its culture, civilization for millennia. So I don't think that invasion of Iran will be quite similar to invasion of Iraq, which was smaller and had a much smaller population.
Now, we've heard about Donald Trump sort of issuing, thinly veiled threats against Khamenei, saying he knows where he is, but that he was not going to take him out for now. Do you think that that's going to change now? Do you think that Donald Trump is now going to go for the very top leader of Iran and possibly other leaders as well to go for actual regime change in the country?
Well, I mean, look, the United States claims that it is the leader of the rules-based international system. I'm sure that the U.S. has the military capacity to do so, but it will leave a very reckless and dangerous precedent in international politics by trying to assassinate the head of state of another country. Just imagine if Russia tried to assassinate the American president. Imagine the outrage, and rightfully so. But even in that case, we have to keep in mind that unlike non-state actors that have been targeted by the U.S., by the Israelis, and their leadership was decapitated, Iran is a state. It has a constitution. There are processes. And the Islamic Republic specifically was born into a revolution. Khamenei himself, the supreme leader Khamenei, survived assassinations. They survived an 8-year war, which was backed by the United States, Great Britain, France, West Germany, Soviet Union. So they're not that alien to foreign attempts to topple them. And just today, there was a New York Times report that Khamenei has appointed 3 potential candidates that would be elected, or rather be considered by the Assembly of Experts, which is in charge of selecting the next supreme leader. So even if he is assassinated, as I stated, there are processes, there are procedures to elect the next supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. So I don't believe that we should expect a sudden regime change in the country either.
All right, Professor Sina Zodi, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us here on TRT World.